Lightning looking for their 15th straight game with a point tonight against the Chicago Blackhawks. And despite their record, I'm going to tell you why the Blackhawks might be one of their toughest opponents yet on today's Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen of the day. Every single day, we are your free daily Tampa Bay Lightning podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. As always, we want to begin with a shout out to our everydayers. Those of you who tune into every single show, every single day, we love you. We appreciate the support you give us week in and week out. I'm Nick Morgan. My partner, Greg Steven, is off today, so we're flying solo on this Friday and a lot of hockey to talk about. Two big games this weekend against the Chicago Blackhawks and Columbus Blue Jackets, both on the road. And yes, those are two big games, and I'm going to explain exactly why that's the case. Plus, we'll talk about tonight's Chicago game and a big key to getting a win against the Blackhawks. Plus, have you seen what's going on with our old captain down in Nashville? Steven Stamkos has been on fire. And not only is he maybe changing his future in Nashville, his hot streak might be changing the entire trade deadline across the NHL. I'm going to explain why coming up a little bit later on today's show. First, though, let's dive into the Lightning's next two games. Big weekend doubleheader coming up this weekend again for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tonight on the road against Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks. 7 o'clock puck drop for that one. And then tomorrow night, they'll take it on the road again against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, a lot of you out there might be thinking one of two things after hearing the intro. Number one, these are two not great teams. This should be easy for the Bolts. And two, this is a big weekend doubleheader. One team's not even in the same conference and the other second to last in the East. That's sort of where I want to make my point heading into today's game. Obviously, we've talked about the Bolts and their hot streak. They're 13-0-1 over their past 14 games. Do you remember who the one was against? The St. Louis Blues. Second worst record in the entire NHL. Now, the Lightning played well in that game, but the Blues came out strong. They held their own, and Joel Hofer had an epic performance to give St. Louis a win. I think people underestimate, and that Blues game was a perfect example of it, just how much teams in a spot like the Blues, like the Blackhawks or the Blue Jackets, really get up for these types of games against opponents like the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, obviously, look, the NHL is a grown man's league with a lot of great players on every team. This isn't college football where the fans are going to storm the field after, a 3-9 dog beats an undefeated team. Look, there's a lot of parity in the NHL and a lot of great players, and any team can win on any given game. But I will say that teams that are struggling, they look at matchups against the top teams as an opportunity to right the ship. And I think that's what you saw with St. Louis taking on the Lightning a couple games ago, when the Lightning broke that win streak and lost in overtime. And I think there's a possibility you see that this weekend as well. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in Nashville. I went to a lot of Preds games growing up, and I saw a lot of really bad Preds teams. I was there in the early years. They were not good. They would get smoked a lot by pretty bad teams. But let me tell you something, though. Being in Bridgestone Arena when the Preds played the Dynasty Red Wings, the Dynasty Avalanche, the Stars, the Blues, even a team like the New Jersey Devils, who were running ramshot through the East in the late 90s, early 2000s, that building came alive, and the Preds fed on that. The Preds had a lot of wins in those games, especially at home, because you could really tell they wanted to come out and send a message to those teams and not just get some much-needed points, but also prove something to themselves and get some momentum going for the rest of the season. That's kind of where the warning comes in for Tampa Bay Lightning right now. Lightning are one of the best teams in the NHL by far. They're a few years removed from being the dynasty in the NHL, and they have a lot of the same people on the team. You're going to have a target on your back in games like this. So that's where I think my biggest key to the game for these next two games are going to come down to. It's playing normal. It's playing to the level that you're capable of. It's really easy for a team in position like that. I'm not necessarily saying the Bolts do it, but they have been, I would say, prone to this in the past couple of years. It's really easy to play down to your opponent, especially if, like the Tampa Bay Lightning are for this game, on the tail end of what's been a very, very long string of road games. Only one home game since January 6th. Look, the Lightning need to be dialed in for these next two games, and that's going to be the biggest key for me in this one. I want to see Nikita Kucherov treat the Blackhawks and the Blue Jackets with that same intensity he played with against Chicago and Dallas. If they're up there, and we're going to talk about this coming up in a little bit, I want to see that third line, that Yanni Gourde combination with Zemgus Girgensons and Pontus Holmberg. I want to see them go up against Connor Bedard, just like they traded Nathan McKinnon. And look, Connor Bedard's a great player. He's going to be in that same comparison in a couple of years. Essentially, I don't want to see anything different from this game to any other game they've played in that 14-game point streak. Because look, here's where things get difficult. If the Lightning slip up, if they play sloppy, if they give the road crowds an opportunity to get into the game and hype up the home team, it's going to be a little bit more of an uphill battle. So if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, this is your opportunity. I'm not going to say easy points. It's not easy points. Nothing in the NHL is easy points. But if you play the way you've been playing, you should have a very strong chance of winning this game tonight and tomorrow against the Blue Jackets for the same reason. Now, obviously, if you get beat by, let's say, a hot goaltender like Spencer Knight, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, that's a little bit different. The Blues game was a little bit different because I think the Lightning clearly outplayed St. Louis in that one and just got beat by a good goaltender. If that happens tonight, it's fine. But what I don't want to see are, a whole mess of turnovers or a mess of penalties or, the Lightning just getting absolutely outshot in a period. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about with sloppy play or messing it up. If the Lightning lose this game, let it be because the Chicago Blackhawks held the hatches down, had good goaltending, and got a timely goal. Don't let it be because the Tampa Bay Lightning lost this game. That's my big ask for not just this game against the Blackhawks, but tomorrow against the Blue Jackets as well, because those are two teams in a little bit of a similar situation. 7 o'clock puck drop tonight against the Chicago Blackhawks, 7 o'clock Eastern. A lot more to get to from this game and tomorrow's game against the Columbus Blue Jackets, including one big key that centers around a couple of players I just mentioned in that opening block, plus an inside look at the Blackhawks and where their rebuild is coming up on today's Locked on Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We are officially in the thick of the NFL playoffs, and FanDuel is in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. That's because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. That's right. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets you like the most. All you need to do is open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boost lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing coaching, momentum, defense, or quarterback play. The boosts give you more juice to place bets that you already like instead of forcing you to bet something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make the picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. You can go to FanDuel.com or just download the FanDuel app straight to your phone to play. Again, FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back on Locked On Lightning. Nick Morgan here. Greg Steven has the day off. Let's talk about tonight's opponents a bit, the Chicago Blackhawks. These two teams met right at the beginning of the season in Tampa. Hawks won that game 7-2. That was back when the Bolts were in the midst of their franchise worst start, and the Blackhawks were in the midst of a pretty hot start. They looked like they were really kind of signaling the start of their arrival. Obviously, whole dynamic of both teams have absolutely been flipped on its head. They pulled a full-on Missy Elliott, flipped it and reversed it. The Bolts figured things out. The Blackhawks have kind of become a little bit stagnant, although they have been hot over these past 10 games. Just got a shootout win against the Carolina Hurricanes. Obviously, a really, really good team. Here's the thing. I will say when I look at the Chicago Blackhawks, I see a team slowly but surely starting to put the pieces together. Obviously, it starts with Connor Bedard. Let's dive into him. Obviously missed a month of action last month, but up until the point he got hurt, he was putting together what was easily the best year of his career. Even now, 48 points in just 37 games. That's pretty high points percentage. He's on pace for his career high in points, and he's just 3 goals away from passing his career high in that mark as well. Obviously, I know the past 2 years, people were kind of diving into the Connor Bedard overrated talk. I think that's stupid. I think it's stupid for anybody to look at a player who, as an 18, 19-year-old, put up 60 points 2 years in a row and say, oh, this guy is not going to be good. I think it takes time for different players to develop. And yeah, like if Connor Bedard was going to play all 82 games this season, the points pace that he's on would make him one of the leading scorers in the entire NHL. So I think the talk of him, not being an elite player is silly. He's going to be really good in this league. I think the big key for Bedard is just he needs more help around him. And that's, I think, what we're starting to see right now. Getting a little more help, especially in goal. Spencer Knight, if we remember, one point the Florida Panthers top prospect, arguably at one point the best goalie prospect in the entire world, quietly having a really good year in net for the Blackhawks. His record maybe not will show it all too well, but .913 save percentage, 3 shutouts, and 7th in the NHL this year in goals saved above expected, according to Natural Stat Trick. Now, for this game, that's kind of giving the little bit of the Joel Hofer vibe from St. Louis. Remember, come in here, steal the game, stand on his head, have a really good performance. Spencer Knight's capable of performances like that. And a goalie like that might actually put the Blackhawks in contendership before all their prospects are kind of ready to step up and be that Stanley Cup contender. Because I think it starts in goal. We talked about this before. If you have a good goaltender, you have a really good eraser. And I think Spencer Knight has the tools to kind of become that eraser for the Chicago Blackhawks. And I know if I'm in the Western Conference and I'm looking at that, a little bit scared, especially because the San Jose Sharks are on the rise there as well. Other depth, it's still kind of working for the Chicago Blackhawks. Like, they're still getting there. Like, obviously this year, Tyler Bertuzzi's carried a lot of the depth scoring load, having a really good year for them. Andrei Burakovsky, still in this league, is also having a pretty solid year there. He's played a lot with Connor Bedard. He's also played kind of on that second line. The other guy I really want to mention, Frank Nazar. To me, he's starting to look like a pretty good complementary 2C behind Connor Bedard on that first line. Maybe a little bit, almost of an Anthony Cirelli vibe a little bit in terms of kind of his two-way play. You can kind of tell they're pushing him to kind of be like the workhorse center as opposed to Bedard's just pure, I don't even know what you call it, pure sexy prospectness. There's got to be a better way to word that. somebody else try to figure it out. It's early on a Friday. But the point being is that I think brighter days are going to be ahead for Sharks or for Hawks fans. Sharks fans also, but definitely Hawks fans. Obviously, some good prospects on the blue line as well. Artem Lashinov, number 2 pick from a couple of years ago, and Vlasic as well is having a pretty good year for them. So I think the Blackhawks are going to be, a good team in this league sooner rather than later. They just got to get all their pieces going at once. Let's flip it to tonight's game, though. For me, the game to containing the Blackhawks is going to come down to, once again, matchups. Now, for the past couple of weeks, we've seen John Cooper throwing that third line out there against the other team's top line. However, Jeff Blashill, Greg's public enemy number 1 for how the defense has done in Tampa Bay this year, Jeff Blashill, head coach of the Blackhawks, he has the last change in this one. And I'm curious if Blash sees what's gone on with that third line in Tampa and doesn't try to find a way to keep Connor Bedard away from Yanni Gord, Zemgus Girgensons, and Pontus Holmberg in Tampa. Now, obviously, whoever winds up going against Bedard, that's going to be the key matchup to me of the game. And whether, the Blashill wants to throw him against Dominic James and Jay Gensel, or whether, he just wants to go firepower on firepower and put him against the Cirelli Hagel Cooch trio. Whoever is out there, they're going to have to deal with a really strong player because Connor Bedard is a really strong player who can make things happen for his team. Obviously, the Lightning have a lot of firepower to counter that. It's going to be tough for Bedard as well. But I do think you need to be aware of number 98 when he is on the ice. And if you're the Lightning, I say this a lot for a lot of games, but just win your matchups. Whoever you're winding up out there against, just make sure that your line is outplaying that other line. And I think that's a big key for the Blackhawks in this one. The other big storyline I'm really watching closely tonight, special teams. If you look, there's actually pretty similar stats between the Lightning and Blackhawks. In fact, the Blackhawks little bit better than the Bolts on special teams this year. We've talked about the penalty kill. The Lightning have the 3rd best penalty kill in the league. Do you know who's number 1? It's the Chicago Blackhawks, folks. Number 1 PK in the league. Lightning are 14th on the power play this year. Hawks are 12th. So one way for another, I think there's potential for special teams to be a game changer in this one. And not just, getting a power play goal or two, but if you're the Lightning, making sure that PK is firing on all cylinders against what's a very capable power play unit for the Blackhawks. And obviously, if you're on the power play, you're trying to get better. The Lightning power play have done a lot better in recent weeks than they have at the beginning of the season, especially with Darren Radish running point there. This is a good test because the Blackhawks power play, as we mentioned, were best in the league. That's another good matchup and a good opportunity for the Lightning power play unit to continue building momentum against a really strong penalty killing unit for Chicago. So I would look for special teams in this one. And I'm also very curious to see, based on the Blackhawks having the second change, who winds up against Connor Bedard, because that to me is going to be the key matchup to watch as well. Again, 7:00 puck drop on this one. We'll talk about this game a little bit on next week's show for the Locked On Lightning. Coming up, though, we're going to talk about Saturday's opponent a little bit as well, the Columbus Blue Jackets, the end of what is going to be a very, very, very long road stretch for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Plus, let's check in on one of our old former players because Steven Stamkos is doing some wild things in Nashville right now. And it's not only maybe changed his future, but it might have changed the entire landscape of the NHL trade deadline or the NHL offseason this year for at least the next year or so. We'll talk about what Stamkos is doing down in Nashville when we come back. Welcome back to Locked On Lightning, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day every single day. We talked about the game against Chicago tonight. 7:00 puck drop in the Windy City for that one. Let's look ahead briefly to tomorrow's matchup as well. The Columbus Blue Jackets, mentioned earlier, second worst team in the East. But the thing about them is record's actually not that bad. 23, 20, and 7. So they're above 500. It's just the fact that the East is so loaded this year. Only one team is below 500. Looking at you, New York Rangers. The one thing I will say for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and maybe the one key to this game, is figure out where number 8 is. Zach Werenski is having the best year of his career. Not just maybe the best year of his career, but maybe the best year for defensemen in the NHL this year. 53 points in 46 games. He has 19 goals already. He's playing almost 27 minutes a night and doing pretty much everything for the Jackets. He's on the number 1 power play. He's on the number 1 penalty kill. He's such a fun player to watch, and I would wager he might be the favorite for the Norris Trophy this year. Maybe not my pick, but I think when you kind of look at him and the reaction he's getting around the league, he seems to be getting a lot of Norris buzz. Even though Cale Makar has more points, Werenski's defensive metrics a little bit better this year, and we've seen that come into play for past Norris races. So obviously, if you're the Lightning, you're going to want to know where number 8 is on the ice at all times, because pretty much everything the Jackets do runs through Werenski. And look, as a University of Michigan fan, I love seeing Werenski have a big impact in the league. He's such a fun player to watch. And obviously the Blue Jackets are not a team that gets broadcast a lot. So do yourself a favor if you're watching this game. And just take a second to watch Werenski's game and maybe have some appreciation for what he does, because one of the most underrated players in the league, I think, just because of the fact that he plays in Columbus. Side note on the Blue Jackets, the guy who's taking the lead in goal this year, he's named Jet Greaves. No really game breakdown, but to me, I would just want to call out one of the most badass names in the entire NHL. Jet Greaves. That kicks ass, man. And also having a pretty good year himself as well. So obviously on next week's Locked On Lightning, we'll talk about their game against Columbus and their game against Chicago. A lot coming up to get to next week. But let's end the show with some kudos for an old friend of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Have you seen what Steven Stamkos has been doing lately? Last night, Bolt's former captain, hat trick for the Nashville Predators against the Ottawa Senators last night, which was much needed because that helped the Senators get some points off the board and put some distance between the Bolts and them. It's the second hat trick for Steven Stamkos within the past calendar month or so. He had that 4-goal performance a little bit. Stamkos has 24 goals this year and is quietly on pace for another 40-goal season. If you haven't been following the Preds lately, Stamkos has been one of the hotter players for the Nashville Predators, who are suddenly red hot. Remember we talked about them being by far the worst team in the NHL. In fact, I had them as like my bottom tier team going into like the power rankings halfway through the year. Suddenly they're in the thick of the Western Conference playoff race. And also what Steven Stamkos' hot streak may have done, it shifted the entire trade deadline picture. Remember, Nashville was one of the teams who were supposed to be in fire sale mode just last month. Stamkos himself was in the middle of a lot of trade talk. At the beginning of the season, my old colleague from Locked On Predators, Ann Kimmel, and I came on the show and talked about Steven Stamkos' future. And she said that, Steven Stamkos was starting to get frustrated at the situation in Nashville. Maybe, they weren't such the contender that he thought they were going into when he signed that big contract last year. He was frustrated by, maybe not getting up to the quality of play that we're used to seeing from Stamkos. But that's changed a little bit. And I will say this, knowing Barry Trotz and knowing just how the Nashville Predators operate, if the Preds are even close to a playoff spot, they're not going to be in fire sale mood, which means Stamkos might be staying in Nashville after all. And one of the biggest teams, that were possibly going to be sellers at this trade deadline, that might take the Preds off the board, which means, Ryan O'Reilly's name was out there. And I mentioned that as somebody that I thought would be kind of a good fit for the Tampa Bay Lightning because of the face-off prowess and just kind of 1 year left on his deal after this year. I thought that, Jonathan Marchessault's name has been out there. I know a couple of you pitched, Marchessault as a player to bring over. I think a couple people were even talking about, hey, let's bring Stammer back home if there's a way to do it. I don't think that might happen. I don't know if that's going to happen at this trade deadline or next trade deadline because of the way the Nashville Predators have played. And a big part of that is up to number 91, Stammer being one of the hottest players for that Nashville Predators team. And I will say this, I do hope things in Nashville work out with Steven Stamkos, not just because here in Tampa Bay, we love him as a player. We want the best for him. But I also hear some chatter behind the scenes that he and his wife, Sandra, really love it in Nashville. And the kids love it too. And, we're hoping they're able to stay there and find some success there. For all that Steven Stamkos has done for this city in Tampa, you just want to see him, finish his NHL career with a bit of happiness. It'd be cool if it was another cup. Maybe it's with Tampa. Who knows? But all the best in 91. It is really cool to see sort of quote unquote vintage Stamkos come out in these games. He's really tearing it up. If you have a chance to watch some Nashville Predators hockey, take a shot of bourbon before you do, because it can get a little bit spicy at times. But also watch Steven Stamkos, because I think you're starting to see him go back to a little bit more vintage Stamkos. Not, maybe not the player he was at his peak, but I think he's proving that there is still some hockey magic for number 91. Obviously, a lot to get to this weekend for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Big game tonight against the Chicago Blackhawks. Big game against the Columbus Blue Jackets tomorrow night. We'll break it all down for you next week when we come back for new episodes of Locked on Lightning. Until then, be sure to follow us on social media, Locked on Lightning, Instagram, TikTok, pretty much wherever you scroll. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening in on your favorite podcast platform. It keeps you guys in the loop when we have new content out for you, and also helps us out a little bit with our ratings and numbers. That's going to do it for us on today's Locked on Lightning. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We'll see you next week for new episodes. Until then, have a good weekend. Take care.